Hello, we are in the Sharding group sync Wednesday, May 4th.
Cool. I have the first one sort of summarizing some bits from the morning. So Dylan and Nikolai worked on some disaster recovery bits and pieces, and I think they came to the conclusion that if we take downtime, setting up logical replication was not going to be worth it. I think there were benchmarking concerns, complexity concerns. So I think that, if that holds, I think that's good. It eliminates an entirely new thing, like new class of errors. And I think we're coming to a place where a rather boring plan is forming for this, which, I think Jose can let us know how insane or good this is. But essentially, I think what we will aim to do is we're going to adopt the database upgrade runbook, which already blocks all of the writes on production until the point where the database upgrade is essentially starting, right? And we have to insert our own failover mechanics at this bit. And then once that is done, let's say in a happy path, right, we then execute the rest of the database upgrade notebook to return it into production. The advantage of this is it's been done before, people have tested it. I think we have some confidence in it. Pretty boring.
Yes.
Then, yes.
Just adding one point here. The platform changes, what I'm saying, like or configurations of nodes with Cloudflare or what is in Kubernetes or not can have changed since the upgrade. Yeah. But I agree, we have this automated and it's something that we are looking as well for the OS upgrade. So yes. I think that we can some or effort there to make it more robust, but I think it's a good approach.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, that's good to know. I mean, yeah, we will have to test this anyways, but I think starting from something that we are already pretty confident in makes me feel much better than reinventing it, right? So then during the failover process, because we're now in a downtime state, right, it's a lot easier to do things than before when we were considering a no downtime approach, right? We can focus on preventing and detecting any known issues. We can install triggers to block writes on the main database. To be fair, I'm not exactly sure what that would all entail, and we should write that down, right? But we should be very clear, like, this is what we can put in place here temporarily to make sure this does not happen, right? And so, but I think that's good. And then I think an important thing in consideration is if we fail over to our, and by failover, I mean essentially promoting the CI standby cluster to become read-writable, right? If that fails somehow, which I think is very unlikely, but if it goes wrong, I think what we need is a good way to roll back quickly, right? And ideally not to phase 2, but to exactly the same way that it was before, we executed the failover. And that's in point C below. We can talk about the mechanics of that.
Yeah, I understand better your question now. The whole point is, at the moment, we are having traffic in this read-only traffic on the CI cluster. If we promote, we cannot go back to this state. What we could eventually do is roll back everything to the main cluster and recreate the CI cluster based on GCS disk snapshots.
Yes. So, I mean, there are 3 ideas that we had. And like you say, we can essentially restore this from snapshots. I don't know how long this would take. And I don't know how much traffic we can tolerate by now on the main cluster either. But that's something to investigate. I think another idea, which is costly, right, but may actually be something that we could do, and I know we're not going to make you very happy, is we could have a standby cluster, a second cluster that is replicating, right, that we're not touching. And then if we burn down our first standby cluster, we're just going to repoint to that one, right? Because that should be very fast, right? And that could be also tested in staging before, and that would be one thing. We would have to create another CI environment, but at that point, that would give us a lot of confidence that we could essentially say, okay, this is catastrophically failed. we're pointing over here and we're pretty much immediately in the state that we were beforehand. So that may be, you know, a boring path forward.
Yes, and I think we could have this backup cluster with less nodes, because if we are attempting to just serve the read-only traffic that we have today, and for my understanding, the boxes are pretty idle, perhaps with 4 or 5 nodes, we are fine.
Yeah, that's true. As long as we're confident that it would be able to handle the read-only node like traffic, I think that's true. So maybe that's the path to go forward, because I think something that Camille was concerned about is if we're not confident that we can quickly roll back, right, then we're a little bit in a pickle, because then we have to make trade-off decisions in the moment. And ideally, we have this all pre-recorded and can say, if this step fails, we will do X, right? And then that's a lot easier. Yeah, cool. Well, that sounds good. Yeah, the other thing is that if we're not going to bother with logical replication very likely. And so the last thing is that we complete this entire process, right? We have 2 databases now, and then a couple of hours later, something breaks, right? Or like we discover a problem, you know. I think the consensus from the team is the ship, the train has sailed, right? At that point, we can only roll forward, because I think then like going back would be so difficult that it is much less disruptive to say, for whatever reason, let's say some, like, I don't know, I'm making up things here because it's really unknown, right? It's like some customers can't schedule CI pipelines anymore, and we don't know why, right? We will have to fix that and roll forward. And I think that's kind of the way to approach it. I think this is sort of the plan in a nutshell.
Yeah, I just had a comment. It's, first of all, it's good to see the thoughts starting to come together on all of this. I'm curious because we did outline some potential scenarios, and so it sounds to me like these are still scenarios that we're worried about, but we think, yeah, if they happen a few hours or we notice them a day or something later, like specifically the split brain scenario, yeah, it may just be, it's not really worth it to try to roll back to some previous state, and maybe not worth necessarily trying to reproduce that, if I'm understanding, but maybe just roll forward and try to address those problems there. I guess I wonder, does this, it sounds like what I'm hearing is we're not going to focus so much on trying to reproduce these scenarios and simulate them and roll back, but maybe more just think through them and as thought experiments and try to have some sort of written plan. Is that correct?
Like reading, I haven't spoken with Dylan, he was not there in the morning, but I think this is broadly correct. I think what we can say is, let's say the scenario is, okay, we will have writes on the main database for CI. You know, what can we actually do to prevent this, right? And you know, maybe we can install triggers, you know, and say like, okay, we are now very, very certain that this is not the case. And then because we have downtime, we can also monitor this, right? And say like, are we actually, like when we run QA, you know, are we getting any writes here? And we can say like, no, you know, and then we can focus sort of on prevention and monitoring during the process to say like, these known scenarios are not happening, right? And then if something really slips through that we don't know, right, we will have to like fix that later, because it's very hard to know. Because I think the determination is that this logical replication bit, you know, as a catch-all for like going back, I think they essentially decided it's too complex. We have no experience doing it, and then we're adding more complexity, right? And is it really worth it? I mean, that technical evaluation is not mine, right? I'm the least qualified person to like say that that is the case, but I trust their judgment, and I think Jose, you can chime in there as well. But this is, I think, where we are.
Cool. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Jose, do you think this is?
I mean, technically speaking, like we were likely gonna run like the composed GitLab for, I don't know, 2, maybe 4 weeks on staging. So it's very like unlikely that we'll notice something that is behaving differently. I'm kind of like more worried not about the application, but about everything that is built around application outside of the application that may be consuming this data. Or like, I don't know, reading or maybe inserting data. Because like application, this is something that we see and we control and we can reason about that. But we build so much tooling around, like outside of the application. Then this is probably like, I think, a good opportunity soon to brainstorm exactly what else could be affected outside of the application for those to be actually be adopted ahead of the time.
Camille, wouldn't we cover some of those use cases with the test cases of disaster recovery? Like we have metrics, like we know where we are inserting, where we are reading, like the percentage of the input that you shared with me some weeks ago. Wouldn't you be confident with that, or with some test scenarios that we are doing with DR?
So like we are confident about the application doing the right thing, and like we are confident of that today. So until like we deploy GitLab race, we are confident that this is working properly. What else is there that is not GitLab race that can match with database? That's my question.
I don't know.
Because like let's say like we have PG bouncer CI, we see the CI traffic goes to the PG bouncer. We application analyzes all queries, we know that they are properly placed. But like I know that in the past we connected to the primaries directly to do some operations. We were doing a lot of things outside of the main access pattern established for the application. So I think this is really my question. Like, what else is there that we are not aware? I know that we had, for example, GitLab exporter in the past, talking directly to the database to scrape some information. There was like this data warehouse that you said they are using ZFS snapshots. There is database lab that they are using also snapshots. They will also need to be adapted. So what else is there that is maybe consuming data or maybe is inserting data into database? Because we're gonna install triggers that are gonna prevent inserting data into tables on the wrong database. This is something that we actually tested and it seems to work well. It's just gonna raise an exception on the query. So this is like our way to ensure that there is no split brain for writes. We don't have like a 100% solution for the preventing reading stale data because our mitigation techniques are on the application level, not on the database level. So there is like a small risk, but we are not really worried about that because from the application point of view, we are pretty confident about the solution today. But it's application still.
I think that's a valid concern. I think I'd hope we'd notice some of this in staging already. We may want to reach out to these teams proactively, but is it fair to say that these are mostly our internal tools for various purposes? This is not customer facing impact, right? If our, I don't know, our analysis scraping breaks, that's bad, but this is not going to have an impact on our GitLab.com customers.
It really depends how bad is that. For example, if we have data warehouse that is like before earnings call because we provide some kind of metrics, it's actually terribly bad.
Yeah.
So I guess like the severity depends on the function served versus like the time of the execution of that function. So
we may not want to do this before an earnings call. Yeah, no, I think you're right.
Yes, but we cannot know ahead of the time when different teams gonna need that.
No, but I think what we can do is if we feel like we don't have enough visibility on this, we can literally write in what's happening at GitLab and say, this is going to happen. If you maintain functionality that directly accesses the Postgres database, please reach out, because we need you to be aware of like forthcoming changes in the next couple of months, right? We can do a little bit of outreach and comms and try to like find these things, because yeah, I'm not sure we can easily find a list of those, which then, by the way, we should create, right? And say like, these are application, like things that we have internal that directly access the database. Maybe that list exists, I don't know.
For example, as for the data warehouse, this is the issue that it's there. It seems that they are understand like the timeline of the project, but that's really the question, like us identifying if these things being done or not being done is effectively the blocker of deploying that on GitLab.com.
Sounds like we, in addition to just kind of running this question by infrastructure, maybe we need to also just make sure that like the data team is aware, and maybe just communicate it more widely and just see what kind of input we get.
We'll get at least some panicked responses, I'm pretty sure. Okay, that's a good point. Okay, but keeping all of this in mind, I tend to agree with Nick that I feel a plan is solidifying, with people not raising, many hands on saying, hey, this is too risky or crazy, right? And I think, of course, there's still unknowns, right? We have to update things and make sure this all gets executed and whatnot, but that's maybe also a question for you, Jose. Do you think in general, this sounds reasonable with, some caveats and having to do more work to figure out rollbacks and whatnot?
Makes sense. I understand the concerns here with external applications, or like, for example, data warehousing and so on. That will be great to talk with them. And as well, I agree with your point that some of the tools that we are having here that are a bit internal is a lot of monitoring that already we are looking through it with the CI cluster and so on. So I believe if we have, for example, a problem, some metric regarding the database we could fix, or the impact will be not so high. But as well, if we can double check or check more times or with more people, will be positive.
I also think that, oh, sorry.
It's
No, this is maybe a general thing. I don't think we need to have answers to all of those things before we, for example, move to actually trying this in staging, right? I think in order to have that, we need to have a clear rollback scenario, right? So like, hey, we're very confident we can roll back, but I think this is something where I would want to like gather all of those things and then actually try and go to staging pretty, quickly, right? Like sensibly and with testing and understanding, but I think we these things are most relevant, for production. But I think we can probably gain a lot more confidence if we, hammer that out and move to staging.
Yes, I think it's super important for us to focus on staging, and rollback probably the first round of the staging will be, because there is also the problem with staging that our process means data loss. So very likely the first staging approaches will be simply we execute our rollout plan up to some point till we enable the user facing traffic, and we simply roll back to kind of probably replicate, try this process 2 times before we fully roll out staging to use 2 databases. Because the tricky part is since we don't have a way to, let's say, roll back staging after it's running for the longer period without data loss, very likely we need to start with the failure instead of the happy path. So the last time we test the happy path is actually the last time we really roll out staging into its final form that is going to be running.
Yeah, I have to think about it a little bit more in detail, but I tend to agree with you that testing the rollback is a really important thing that I'd like to maybe do first, right? And then if we say yeah, we can actually roll back in this fashion and we're happy with this, right? Then the happy path should work. But if it doesn't, we also know that we've tested the rollback ahead of time, right? So we have more confidence that we can actually. And so
I mean, when we're gonna be rolling out staging, at least this is my understanding. We just roll this out up to the moment that we run QA and the QA did succeed.
Yes.
So this is in our upgrade procedure, it's a decision point. Do we open a traffic or do we roll back? And basically we actually tested the full happy path each time.
And then we just roll back and test the rollback on top of it, essentially.
And basically at the last point, you just make a decision. We just roll back for the sake of doing rollback in order to retest the process again.
Yeah. I think we should set a target date for when we want to do this on staging. And I think that needs to take into account 15.0, but I think we should make a date and say this is what we are aiming for, and then use that as a forcing function to say this is what we all need in place at that point. And we always slip, but I think it would be useful to say let's try to get it done in, I don't know, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever.
I think even we're looking at the migration stuff, we don't need migration stuff if our purpose of rolling out the staging is to perform a rollback.
Yes.
The regular application QA, we just work fine without what is still in the development pipeline. We need migration stuff when we perform the final rollout to keep staging as decomposed. So at least from my perspective, I don't see development blockers. It's more I think preparing the process, Ansible scripts, figuring out how we can roll back in this model, maybe what you Jose proposed, and basically trying to execute this.
Yep, I agree. What gut feeling? What's a realistic time frame for accomplishing this?
Jose?
If you want to have a new cluster, 2 weeks, we can get a new cluster there, or a new Cascade cluster of Cascade to test a possible rollback. In staging 1 week to 2 weeks, we can get it.
Cool. Let's find a date and say let's target staging as then, because I think 2 weeks is not a bad idea, because I think in 2 weeks is also when most of the 15.0 stuff should be done, right? And then I think that's a good time point, right? Maybe after the release 15.0 has shipped, right? We can do this.
I mean, 2 weeks seems pretty challenging, because will we actually like prepare these Ansible scripts till that moment? Like you mentioned that like database benchmark testing environment, we likely would have to execute that before.
Wait, what are we proposing here in 2 weeks? To provision a new cluster to use as a rollback procedure, right? Or would
Yes.
you like to adapt? Yeah, okay, because if you want to adapt everything to,
Also that.
oh, then Houston, we have a problem because this will demand more time. Because we need to review the whole process of stop traffic, execute your upgrade.
So the thing is, like, I'm not
or
saying you have to
recognition
do
or
all of
whatever.
this in 2 weeks, right? But I'm saying it's like, maybe we should aim for like 2 and 2.5 weeks to do this, and then actually review with the infrastructure team and say like, who would need to be able to help with this? Because I think what we, like, I think the provisioning will take some time, right? I think it will be a challenge, but I think if we can say like, look, we have here a plan, right? These are the changes that we still need to make, right? This is the work that needs to happen, but we want to actually move relatively quickly on this because that's going to be important for us. Then, you know, that puts, I think, everybody in a position where we can say like, okay, maybe Raphael can help with this as well, right? Maybe someone else. I think these discussions are happening, right? And then some of that work can maybe be parallelized, right? I'm not proposing you do all of it. I'm saying if we set ourselves an ambitious target, maybe we can move forward. I know, but it needs to happen. I'm not saying it needs to be in 2 weeks exactly, but I think we need to move.
I mean, like if you would be able to test like the first rollback to staging by end of this month, it would be, I think, desired to like be sticking with our timeline when we want to deploy that.
I agree.
Because if we slip past this month, it's actually, I'm pretty sure then like the deploy gonna slip as well to the production.
Yes.
Because there is simply be not enough time for us to run staging long enough with the two databases. I'm kind of like, I still anticipating that for this major piece, we need probably like 4 weeks of the full runtime. This would be like, for me, like me personally, like a comfortable buffer.
Yeah, I know, but I may push a little bit on it. I need to really hop. I have another meeting. That was super productive. Thank you so much for your input, Jose.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.